Are you serious? What about all your lectures to Sean and I about not taking things into our own hands? Or about how two wrongs don't make one right? I guess I've been trying too hard to instill a sense of honor in you boys. Tell me something, Danny. If Zach, my father raised his hand to silence me as I opened my mouth to interrupt him. Let me finish. If Zach had come to your house a month ago and told you to your face that he was going to steal Claire from you, that he was going to take her with him right here and now, would you have defied him? Would you have fought him for her? Of course. My father only raised one eyebrow. That was all it took for me to have an epiphany. Oh, good, I get it. About time, Sean said. The only difference is that the bastard didn't have the guts or decency to tell you to your face. True, but Claire shares the blame. She may even have been the instigator. The letters suggest she made up many of the things they did. And I can't go and punch her in the face, can I? No, you can't, but we'll deal with her in other ways, Dad agreed. But when it comes to your cousin, I don't care. He should have said no. Not only that, you were his friend. He should have walked away. Maybe take a closer look, but still walk away. But he didn't. Okay, consider me convinced. Let's figure out how I can do this so I don't end up in jail. Next chapter. The weekend flew by faster than I thought it would. My family rarely left me alone. They made me make plans, with Dad and Sean's plans being slightly different from Mom and Mel's. It was the best thing they could do. It helped me focus and keep my pain and grief in check. And perhaps most importantly, it turned my simmering, about to boil over anger, into something cold, implacable, and decisive. Something constructive, not destructive. Mom and Mel tweaked my ad and made sure it was placed not only in the local paper, but also in a free newspaper and another publication from a neighboring town that was popular with the locals for its sports coverage. The ad appeared in all the newspapers the following Monday and ran every day for the entire week. Mom, God bless her hard heart, wanted to make sure the ad was seen by everyone in our town. Claire called several times and wrote me a long letter. I transferred the calls to voicemail, where she left me essay-length messages. They all basically boiled down to the same thing. She loves me. Don't throw away our love and the 12 happy years we spent together. I snorted. Hadn't she gone through her things and found her love letters missing? I repacked her books, but still. Hadn't she figured it out? Is she really so presumptuous that she thinks I don't know anything about her affair? Was she really trying to deceive me? To be arrogant? Does she really know so little of me that she thinks my feelings can be turned off like a faucet? Apparently, yes. The only awkward moment was Sunday dinner at Mom and Dad's, and Claire showed up just as we were about to sit down to eat. Mel and Sean immediately took Maddie and Declan into the backyard so they wouldn't hear what happened between my mom and Claire. Thank goodness they did, because Claire put on one hell of a show, crying and wailing. My already high regard for my mom went up another notch. She remained unconcerned with Claire's emotional game. Please, Ellie, you have to stand up for me. I don't know what's gotten into Danny that's made him act so irrationally. Maybe he's having some sort of emotional breakdown. Please, I'm begging you. Please convince him to talk to me. He loves me. I know he does. He couldn't stop overnight. As far as I'm concerned, darling, he never loved you. There's nothing you can do about it. If you haven't been able to inspire him to love you, either by word or deed, after 12 years together, I don't see how one more conversation is going to make any difference. Now, if you don't mind, I have guests and dinner. And then she closed the door in the bitch's face. Next chapter. Monday evening, the first shit landed on the table. Claire had either read or received the breakup notice, so at 5:30, a hysterical woman showed up on the doorstep talking cheating bullshit as usual. Luckily for me, Sean stopped by after work. The realization that he was there for me helped me keep my composure. I had never been more grateful for the family's "don't let Danny spend too much time alone" plan. I knew he would save me if it seemed like I was losing my self-control or deviating from our plan. Danny, you have to believe me. It's not what you think. I can explain. Honestly, did she really think I was that stupid? Maybe she was making excuses. After all, she'd managed to fool me for 12 years, but even so, what other interpretation could there be? Standing next to Danny and watching you walk down the aisle is the most twisted, most perverted thing I've ever known? Or do you really want to have a baby with me? Did she really think she could convince me that it was innocent, justified, acceptable, reasonable behavior, all of the above? Look, it doesn't matter, Claire. It really doesn't matter. It just shows that it's time to move on. Our marriage is over. No, Claire shouted so loud I was sure the neighbors could hear. It looked like Mom was right. For some reason, Claire wanted to save our marriage. No, that can't be it. I love you, Danny. Please give me a chance to explain. You have to give me a chance to explain everything. I don't owe you anything, Claire. And explaining to you what you're doing to my cousin is a waste of time. I don't care. Please, Danny. Despite what you said, I know I hurt you and I really didn't mean it. Please let me explain. I sighed impatiently. I'd given that bitch a chance to explain herself, not because I wanted to hear her lie. Thanks to my family, I'd finally overcome that painful need. But because my mother had offered to give Claire the opportunity to, figuratively speaking, hang herself with her lies. Nevertheless, she's going to have to work at it. Gone were the days of her looking at me with puppy dog eyes and getting what she wanted. What's the point, Claire? I need you to understand, Danny. If you let me explain, I know I can make you understand. I hummed again, glancing at my watch. Okay, I'll come over tomorrow night at 5:30. You'll have 30 minutes. My tone was harsh, making it clear I didn't want that. Thank you, Danny. You won't regret it, I promise. Where do you want me to meet you? Here? I didn't trust this slut as far as I could push her away with my little finger. I needed more than a recording from my phone. I wanted privacy, but I also needed witnesses in case things turned bad or she tried to lie about what was said or done during the meeting. If the recording was being done at my house, I could invite someone from my family. Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much. Claire stepped forward, shortening the distance between us, and put her hands on my shoulders. She pulled herself up on her toes and leaned in to kiss me. Her intentions were so obvious. Did she really think that if she managed to set me up, I would melt and forgive everything? I couldn't tell if she was arrogant or deluded. I grabbed her hands, stepping back and pushing her away at the same time, causing her to lose her balance and stumble. I flinched, showing my disgust on my face. Please don't you dare show me any tenderness. I'm really sorry, It's just that I love you and I miss you, Danny. Whatever you say, Claire. I'll see you tomorrow night. Next chapter. Tuesday dawned bright and clear with no warning of the unexpected turn the day would take. I was finishing work on a beautiful Jara wood kitchen countertop when I was contacted by a local radio station. It turned out that Haley, one half of their morning radio show Oscar and Haley, had read the breakup announcement and recognized my name because she was friends with Dee, another one of my maternal cousins. Apparently, it's true what they say, small world. Haley contacted Dee, who in turn contacted my mom and Mel. Mom and Mel were happy to share the love letters with my cousin, and she, with their permission, passed them on to Haley. I vacillated between feeling disgusted that my private affairs were being put on public display and elation that perhaps Claire and Rathzak would be publicly humiliated after all. To say I was embarrassed is an understatement. I felt emasculated, like I couldn't satisfy my wife and remain faithful to her. But as the saying goes, one digs two graves in seeking revenge. And if my grave is a disgrace, I'll live with it. What did I care what a bunch of strangers thought of me? The people I cared about knew what kind of person I was, and more importantly, deep down I thought so too, despite my moments of doubt. I had a long conversation with Haley. She seemed sympathetic and sweet. Somehow, her invasion of my privacy didn't seem like an invasion at all. Dee had apparently said a lot of unnecessary things to me, and it was empowering. For me, it meant that my extended family stood up for Danny's corner. At the end of the conversation, I agreed to be interviewed on air Friday morning and gave them permission to use some of the letters on my website and Facebook page. In order not to overwhelm the broadcast, some words or phrases would have to be blacked out, but the point, she assured me, would remain clear. For the next few days, they will be discussing the topic of infidelity, encouraging listeners to send in their stories. My interview on Friday would be the culmination of their forum. We agreed to meet the next day so I could sign a letter authorization form. If the show goes as planned and the audience reacts as Haley predicts, Claire and Zach will be judged by a jury of their peers. They probably won't face jail time, as unfortunate as that may be. But then again, not all prisons have bars. Next chapter. I looked around and shuddered. My clothes weren't too suitable for meeting someone at a coffee shop. I climbed out of the truck and ironed my jeans and t-shirt to remove the sawdust. With a rag, I wiped down my work boots. I shrugged it off. The result wasn't perfect, but it had to work out. It couldn't be helped. I needed to make a living anyway, and I didn't have time to go inside and change my clothes. Walking into the fancy cafe that Haley had picked out, I stopped and looked around. I knew what Haley looked like from the billboards and the ads for her Oscar show on the side of the bus. I noticed her bowed blonde head in one of the booths. Good, at least we'd have some privacy. I watched as she glanced at her watch and then looked up. I smiled and raised my hand in thanks. She raised her hand and smiled too. She was average height, but that was the only thing average about her as far as I could tell. She looked much better in person than she did in the publicity photos. Her hair reminded me of Meg Ryan from the movie with Matthew Broderick. Addicted to something. Love? I couldn't remember. Her hair was pretty funny. Short, messy, sticking out here and there with long bangs thrown over her forehead. Daniel? She asked. You could hear a note of huskiness in her voice like Emma Stone or Demi Moore. Please call me Danny. Her smile widened and we shook hands. Her grip was pleasantly firm. I think I know you already, she said, settling into her seat. Back in high school, Dee used to talk about you and Sean a lot. She'd probably kill me for telling you this, but she often lamented the fact that you and she were cousins. So, well, you can tell her for me that Sean has often lamented the fact that they're cousins too. Haley laughed, and it was a pleasant sound that enveloped you and made you feel warm. And you don't? No, I chuckled. I was too busy staring at Jilly Clark the whole time. Think back to Dolly Parton and you'll see what this is all about. She was defying the laws of physics. Said, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering you a cappuccino. It seemed pretty safe to me. You're welcome. Thank you. We smiled awkwardly at each other, neither of us knowing how to broach the subject of the elephant in the room. I felt a little better. The fact that she was uncomfortable asking me about Claire's infidelity showed that there was humanity in her, that my pain and betrayal wasn't an everyday occurrence for her. I looked into her eyes and was surprised to see that they weren't blue or gray as I'd expected. They were green. Very green. In fact, I couldn't recall ever seeing such green eyes before. They didn't sparkle like emeralds, but rather shimmered like the glossy leaves of the peace lily that usually stood in the center of Mom's dining room table. Now, she reached across the table and touched the back of my palm. I read the letters, Danny. They're so awful. I can't even imagine how you felt when you found them. Can you tell me about it? I studied her, looking for signs of deception or contrived sincerity. I didn't find any. So maybe we can decide later what stays behind the scenes. There are details I definitely don't want to share with every Tom, Dick, or Harry. Of course, that goes without saying. I don't want to know about it out of morbid curiosity or for some sick voyeuristic reason. I need to know so I can plan my questions. I must warn you that Oscar is irreverent and may drop a few barbed phrases to make people laugh or raise the temperature. I promise I'll only give him phrases you don't mind sharing with our audience. I nodded. Taking a deep breath, I stared at my hands clutching my coffee mug. Thank God she'd ordered a large one. I needed every drop. I tried to look at her while I told my story, but found I couldn't hold her gaze, but every time I looked at her, she was watching me, her expression serious but kind. I told her everything, not only about finding the letters, but also about Claire, who I thought I knew, and about our marriage. There was something about Haley that demanded the truth, but with every word that flew off my lips, I wondered how wise it was to be so brutally honest. I could only hope that my faith wasn't in vain. That's it. It's not very pretty, is it? No, it looks like some horribly twisted B-movie. That's what Mel said. If I hadn't heard it and seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it was possible. It's just too weird. It's surreal. It's inconceivable that two normal, ordinary people could behave like this. Truth really can be stranger than fiction. Yeah, and I'm just a blind fool who didn't suspect a thing. Don't blame yourself, Danny. You didn't notice the signs because you weren't looking for them. And why should you? You thought you were happily married. When I was a communications major, I took a psychology class and they had a name for it. God, what was that? Haley closed her eyes and frowned, tapping herself quickly on the forehead. I couldn't help but smile. The gesture looked cute. I get it. She lit up like a Christmas tree. It's called confirmation bias or something. I raised my eyebrows. God, that sounds like an ambiguous expression. What exactly does it mean? When you love someone and believe the love is mutual, it affects how you perceive the words and actions of the one you love. Basically, you believed that Claire loved you, so everything she said or did you interpreted in a way that confirmed your belief. It would take a lightning strike to make you reconsider. The fact that you found the letters was your lightning strike. Then I'm not an idiot. Far from it. I smiled. Well, that's gratifying. Did you love her very much? Yes, no, I sighed. I loved the woman I thought she was, but the woman mentioned in the letters wasn't the Claire I knew, so I guess I was in love with a fantasy. That must be hard to come to terms with. Yes. You seem remarkably in control of yourself. I think I would have cried. It hurts, but I hid it so I could deal with it later. What do you mean you hid it? I'll give you an analogy. Suppose you hurt your leg so badly that an infection got into it and gangrene formed. Would you cry and moan and wail about how unfair it was, giving the infection time to spread further up your leg? Or would you put a bullet in, amputate your leg, and mourn its loss, knowing that at least you had saved the rest of your leg? Ah, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Like taking one bite at a time rather than trying to eat the whole loaf at once? I nodded, taking a sip of coffee. I held back a grimace of disgust. It was still lukewarm. What are your plans for the future? Do you have any? Have you given it any thought? To be completely honest, I feel a little lost, like a boat without an anchor. Until I found the letter, my whole life revolved around Claire and our marriage. It was about fixing up the house, starting a family, taking one last big trip before we become parents. Now it's all in the past. I took another sip of my warm coffee, gathering my thoughts in hopes that I could express them in a way Haley would understand. I'm a carpenter. I specialize in interior decorating, things like kitchens, wood-framed playrooms, restaurants, pubs, man caves, and so on. Usually it goes like this. The builder or architect gives me some plans, I talk to the owner, and then design and build something to fit the space and their needs. And now, it feels like the plan for my life, the plan I've been working from for the last 12 years, has been ripped out of my hands and torn to shreds. And I have to go and design a whole new life. It's frightening. Mentally, I realize that it will get easier from here on out. You just have to live one day at a time, but it's still scary. After all, what are the rules now? What are the limitations? I need to rethink what I want my future to be. Haley reached out and placed her hand on mine. That's very profound, poetic even. We should try to incorporate that into your interview. We talked some more, exchanging ideas of questions she could ask me to steer the conversation in the right direction. I told her about my upcoming meeting with Claire, and we agreed to talk on the phone Thursday night if we needed to change anything as a result of that meeting. I waited for Haley to settle the bill. She declined my offer to pay. I opened the door in front of her and walked her to her car, a small, sporty Renault. It suited her. Let me guess, that's your car across the road. I grinned. What gave me away? The fact that it's a truck or all those toolboxes? Haley hummed. Both were big clues, but the deciding factor was your license plate Dan007. I laughed. Yeah, that's me, McCormick. Dan McCormick, construction license. Oh, and a comedian too. Now that's funny. We laughed again and said goodbye. As I walked across the street to my truck, it dawned on me that for a few precious moments I was happy, truly happy. Next chapter. I frowned, stopping halfway through. I needed to check the time again. I rested my hand on the back of my chair and frowned even harder. My hands clenched into fists by themselves, my knuckles turning almost white from the strength of my grip. My throat ached, an impossibly tight lump in it. I tried to swallow it and frowned at the pain. Gritting my teeth, I loosened my grip and unclenched my fingers, not surprised by the indentation in the leather of the chair. Slowly, as if it were a huge weight, I lowered my chin to my chest. The action was controlled and deliberate, but it was more from stubbornness than from actually owning my emotions. The only thing I couldn't control was the pounding of my heart. It puzzled me. Why was it rumbling like a freight train? Was it anger? Resentment? Nerves? Or the love I still felt for her? No, it wasn't that. The woman I loved was not the one about to knock on my door. This woman never existed. She was just a figment of my imagination, a mirage. But I mourned her. I missed her. I missed my delusion. Her loss had left a huge hole in my life. Breathe in, breathe out, repeat. Slowly, deeply, and soothingly, in complete silence that you could call meditation. It acted like a cooling salve on an open wound. Of course, Claire and I had no more chance of healing. We were burned to the ground like coals, and had been since the first time she'd spread her legs for him. I just didn't know it. Continuing to breathe evenly and waiting for my heart to slow, I reminded myself of the plan. As much as I wanted to rip her to shreds with my words, it would have to wait. Claire would tell me everything herself, and I would just take in what she said. I heard, rather than saw, Sean come up behind me. Taking one last deep breath, I lifted my head and turned to face him. With a reassuring smile on his face, he reached out and took my shoulder. All set. The video camera is pointed at the table and is already on. I charged the battery last night, so you're covered in case of malfunctions. Thanks for everything, Sean. He waved away my thanks. You do the same for me. Are you ready for that? More than ever. I better get this over with. Sean nodded. So, I laughed. Yeah, I know. Bland, boring, and indifferent. You can do it, Danny. One conversation and the worst will be behind you. I barely had time to nod before there was a terrifying rumble in the hallway. Sean and I looked at each other. He smiled and gave me a thumbs up when he saw me keeping a neutral expression on my face. I'll wait in the dining room while you let her in. I craned my neck and squared my shoulders one last time, trying to release the tension that had built up between them before stepping out into the hallway to let my traitorous wife in. One look at her showed her anxiety. It amused me. Damn, it looked like her time at the spa had been wasted. What a shame. Claire, follow me. We'll have this meeting in the dining room. Oh, okay. The click of her heels followed me as I made my way to the back of the house. Sean was standing at the sliding glass doors overlooking the back patio. He turned when he heard us enter the room. I noticed her surprise when she saw Sean next to me. Danny, Hi, Sean. Sean tilted his head in acknowledgement. Claire, I'll wait on the terrace, Danny, while you and Claire talk. Sean pushed open the door and, after giving me one last glance, made his way inside. Turning to Claire, I noticed her flushed cheeks and assumed she knew why I'd made sure Sean was present. With him as a witness, she had no chance of pulling a stunt and accusing me of anything that could go against me in the divorce. Besides, it hid the fact that I was recording our meeting. Why do both? Can I get you something to drink? Water, please. I deliberately placed her glass where the guests usually sat before taking my usual seat at the table. Perhaps the message would have been too subtle for her, but I didn't think so as she paused before sitting down in the seat I indicated. Carelessly, as if I had all the time in the world, I leaned back in my chair, taking a sip of water. I didn't speak or encourage her to speak. I just sat there, watching and waiting. Huh. I, Danny, I'm so glad we can finally talk. I've missed you so much. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I have to say it. I still love... Don't, Claire. I needed to say it. Please believe me. And once I explain and make you understand, maybe we can... I said enough, Claire. I don't love you. And I don't want to hear your declarations of love. You've wasted your 30 minutes. And put that in your pipe and smoke it, you lying, traitorous bitch. To my surprise, she hesitated for only a moment. The look of shock on her face was only fleeting, appearing and disappearing and soon replaced by a flash of irritation, as if I were a naughty puppy who hadn't learned a new trick fast enough. Surely she wasn't so deluded as to think that all she had to do was tell me she loved me, and I would forgive and forget? She lowered her gaze to her hands holding the glass of water, as I guessed to hide her emotions. I don't believe you. I can't. You loved me too much to just turn it off like a switch. She risked a glance at me but didn't find what she was looking for. Her statement didn't move me. She furrowed her eyebrows and stared at her hands again. I'm sorry I hurt you, Danny. It wasn't part of my plans. I want you to know that it wasn't you. You didn't do anything. It was something separate to us. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. With us. She paused, as if expecting me to say something. I didn't. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to yell at her. You did? Is that what you're saying? That you bringing a third person into our marriage had nothing to do with me? Next time you'll say it was for my own good. I gripped the back of my chair harder so I wouldn't jump to my feet and yell at her. I'd really like you to explain to me how you're having fun with my cousin and that I had nothing to do with it. How it was good for me. For us. Explain to me how it wasn't a betrayal of trust. It wasn't a stab in the back. Wasn't mean-spirited and selfish. Instead, I took a sip of water. Danny, there's a lot you don't know about me. Things I never wanted you to know. I resisted the urge to raise my eyebrows in a sarcastic reply, humming to myself. Calm, neutral, boring, calm, calm, neutral, boring, calm, neutral, neutral, boring, calm, neutral, boring, calm, neutral, boring, over and over again. As you know, I grew up in Broken Hill. It's a small town in many ways. Everyone seems to know each other. Well, I was known as a bit of a wild child. She sighed and turned her head to the side, showing me the extent of her blush. It ran down her neck to the collar of her blouse. More than a little. I was a whore. I had a reputation. A bad one. When my father was transferred to Kiama in my last year of high school, I used the move as a chance to reinvent myself. She looked at me, trying to gauge my reaction. Receiving no response, she continued. For the most part, I succeeded. But as I discovered, the whole party lifestyle can be addictive. Sometimes I felt like I was crawling out of my skin from the urge to break free. I struggled with how restrictive this lifestyle was compared to my bad girl days. I solved this problem by restricting myself. A couple times a month, I would go to Sydney or Wollongong or down south to Navra, anywhere where I wasn't known. And you could say I had a blast. Once I'd had my fill, so to speak, I could spend the rest of the month being a good girl. She paused again, studying me and waiting for a response. Again, I answered nothing, only looked at her with an expressionless stare. Then I was offered a promotion if I agreed to move to Newcastle. I met you a month after I moved. You were so sweet and wonderful, and we had so much fun together. For a while, the urge to be promiscuous died down, but after about 6 months, I got the itch again. By coincidence, I had to go to Sydney for a week for work, and I got hooked. On the last night, I ran into Zach. He saw me doing something I shouldn't have been doing with some guy and cornered me. At first, I thought he was going to tell me off, but he didn't. Oh God, this is so hard, told me he liked a good slut. That's how it started. Tears rolled down her red cheeks, dripping from her chin onto her blouse. You have to know that it was all just part of the game he and I were playing. I didn't mean anything by it. It's hard to explain. She had the decency to look away. It was a fulfillment of a need, Danny, nothing more. I didn't expect love and care and security from him. I didn't want that from him. I wanted it from you because I love you. I didn't want to live with him. You're the one I want to grow old with. I swear I never loved him. It wasn't the same with him as it was with you and me. I suppressed the urge to snort in disgust. I couldn't suppress my thoughts, however. They were silently nagging at her. So now you're schizophrenic. Well, thank you for that insight. Danny, please try to understand. He satisfied one need, nothing more. It wasn't emotional. Just physical, not emotional. As if that mattered. It took everything in me to remain silent and calm. My gut clenched with the urge to respond. A bitter taste of bile filled my mouth from the fact that I could only respond mentally. Someday, I consoled myself. Someday I would be able to say them out loud. I didn't mean to hurt you, Danny. I wish I could take it all back, to get a second try. Was she being truthful? Didn't want to hurt me? How else could she have envisioned this situation? That she would hurt me was a foregone fact. The only question was when. How could she not realize that? And since she did, it couldn't be helped. The horse left the stable, it galloped away, trampling my heart. Tears came to my eyes and slowly rolled down my cheeks. Were they real? Were they part of her game? In truth, it didn't matter if they were real or fake, because nothing depended on them for the outcome of our conversation. Please say something, Danny. Please say you understand. You don't understand. I honestly thought that as long as you didn't know, it wouldn't hurt you. I wanted to protect you. Protect us. Our love. Our sweet, sweet love. Becoming his whore once or twice a month, I could be a good wife to you the rest of the time. I'm so sorry, please forgive me. Please love me enough to forgive me. Her plea and apology stunned me. It was clear that she didn't see herself as a villain, perhaps not exactly an innocent or victimized party, but definitely not a villain. She saw herself as a victim of her addiction, as she called it. Did she really think that I should forgive her and turn a blind eye to the fact that she had a promiscuous sex life to satisfy her need to act like a whore once or twice a month? How could she not realize what she admitted with her confession? I had already said that the Claire described in the letters was not the Claire I loved and cherished. Now I knew that for sure. Her constipation allowed her to play a role, the role of the sweet wife. It was a role, nothing more than a role. Sweet Claire may have gotten more airtime, but that didn't change the fact that the real Claire was a selfish whore. She fidgeted, my silence clearly making her nervous. Danny, please, please say something. I need to know what you're thinking. Please give me a second chance. We've been happy. For 12 years you were happy. We can be happy again if you let me make things right. Please let me come home. Make it right? How do you atone for a decade of lies and deceit? Disrespect? No. That was all I said to her. One word. Danny, please. I know what I did was terrible. I'll spend the rest of my life being the best wife I can be if you give me another chance. Does our marriage mean nothing to you? Can you really walk away so easily? I picked up my glass and drank the last sip of water, trying to quench the fire burning in my gut and drown the rage that was about to spill over my lips. The injustice of her words tested my resolve. Would I give up on our marriage? Would I walk away easily? This was about her. She was the one who had given up on us before we even started living. She pretended to be something she wasn't and doomed us to failure from the start. I closed my eyes and took a sip, imagining myself sinking into the cool, calm waters of the meadow pond, and began to count. When I reached 10, I regained my composure. Yes, I can walk away, and not even look back. I glanced at my watch. I think your time is up. The trickles of tears turned to outright sobs. Danny, I love you, only you. I'm yours. I've always been yours. He was just fulfilling his function. Don't give up on us, Danny. Please give me a chance. I can make you trust me again. I can make you love me again. Just give me a chance. I've learned my lesson. I'll never let you down again. That's enough, Claire. Please calm down. The meeting is over. I stood up and, without looking in her direction, headed to the front door, opened it, and waited. I waited for quite a while. She walked towards me. Her step was slow, as if she was walking to an execution. She stopped beside me and raised her pleading eyes to me. I love you, Danny. I love you so much. Can't we try to get counseling? Please tell me you'll at least consider it. Counseling is pointless. I don't love you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans for tonight. I closed the door quietly, proud of myself for not giving in to the urge to slam it shut. I turned and headed down the hall. The sound of Claire's sobs followed me, but I didn't turn around or hesitate. Next chapter. Sean was in the dining room, leaning back in one of the chairs. He was pulling a camera from the top shelf of the display case. I watched him place it on the dining room table. Are you okay? He asked, grabbing my bicep. I knew he was ready to hold me if he needed to, but I was so full of rage that I needed movement, not comfort. Did you hear anything? A little. Can you believe it? She spent 12 goddamn years lying, cheating, and betraying me. 12 goddamn years of disrespect, and she thinks admitting she's a slut is going to somehow make things better? That a simple "I'm sorry" accompanied by a few tears will make it all better? Nothing she can say or do will change the fact that she spent over a decade cheating on me. Those 12 years I will never get back. No matter what she does to make amends, it will always be a part of our history. She made a unilateral decision to feed her so-called addiction outside of our marriage without discussing a word with me. And now she wants to cry "woe is me" because she has to live with the consequences? The only reason she wants me to take her back is so she doesn't have to deal with the consequences. She's just afraid she'll lose her good girl status among her family and friends. I agree, Danny. Whatever planet she lives on, it's not planet Earth. Yeah, I know. I think she thinks her affair should be considered on par with when she borrowed my car and wrecked it, or when she accidentally threw my new cell phone in the washing machine. But Danny, Sean mimicked Claire's voice, I'm addicted to being a slut, so I can't be held accountable for my actions. I snorted, strutting back and forth in front of the glass sliding doors. Did you hear her say that as long as I don't know about the affair, it's off limits to me? Jesus, Sean, this is so messed up. It took everything I had not to jump over the table and strangle the bitch. I'm not hurt because I was in the dark? That's like saying cancer doesn't hurt you just because for X amount of time you didn't know it was lurking in your body. Try convincing a cancer victim of this logic. Whether you know it or not, cancer is still eating away at your insides, slowly killing you. It just does it stealthily until it can't hide its evil face anymore. Sean patted me on the shoulder and headed for the refrigerator. He pulled out a couple bottles of beer and held one out to me. Here, I think you deserve this. Man, I was so proud of you. I'm not sure I could have kept my composure when she was talking some bullshit. You even scared me. You sounded so official and nonchalant, like a high school principal. Didn't you feel sorry for her? Maybe you were thinking of settling things down. No, not once. In fact, when I looked at her, I felt disgusted. All I saw was an actress playing her part. Nothing she could say or do could convince me that our marriage had any meaning to her. Nor could it, or she wouldn't have given in to her impulses and invited him back to her place over and over again. She did things for him that she didn't do for me. She was Little Miss Pretty with me. And you read the letters. God, she asked him to be the father of our children. You know how long I asked her to start a family? And she was going to deny me even that. That's not love. That's hate. But even without all that, I refuse to live in quiet desperation, wondering and doubting who the real Claire is. I don't want to live with a constant knot in my gut, suspecting every time she's late, or out of sorts, or, God forbid, not in the mood, and agonizing over whether she's really with me at that moment, or whether she's pasted some other guy's face over mine and imagines it's him she's doing it with. I can't tell you how relieved I was to hear you say that, Danny. Admittedly, I was worried that she'd get to you and somehow convince you to forgive her. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. You put a lot of time and emotion into this woman. And I would support you if that's what you really wanted, but I just don't see any happiness for you if you go down that path. I nodded, continuing to pace. I felt like a bull pounding its paws on the ground. What I don't understand is that if Claire wanted to have fun, why would she marry you? Why marry you at all? Why even date seriously? She could have presented herself as a career woman, acted easy and casual, dated other people, and when either of you got bored or saw someone else you liked, you could have moved on with your lives without any hard feelings. I nodded in agreement. Sean was right. Why get married at all if she had to have fun to be happy? If a guy doesn't like that kind of thing, it's not going to end well, no matter who she marries. Exactly. To me, a huge part of what makes marriage special is that from the day you stand at the altar in front of your family and friends and say your vows, you know that when you say those words, you are promising each other to be faithful forever. You know that you are promising her that she is the only woman you will make love to. And the same thing happens in reverse. She promises to be yours and yours alone from this day forward. What makes a marriage special without this vow of fidelity? How is it different from casual dating? Why make a commitment? Why make the compromises and sacrifices that all successful marriages require? Without her fidelity, there was nothing special about her and me. Without that trust and commitment to be faithful to each other, I don't think there is any real intimacy. And without that, she's just another notch on my pole. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but for me it's simple. Black or white, no shades of gray. Either she's mine or she's not. No in-between options. That's just not how I'm wired. And despite her assurances that she was mine, she wasn't. Never. She was only pretending. Wow, I don't think Mom or Mel could have said it any better. You should say some of that shit when they interview you. He winked at me. Since when did you turn into a philosopher, Dr. Dan? Probably because of all the sawdust you've inhaled over the years. I laughed, Sean's teasing smoothing out my anger. Well, at least I didn't get struck by lightning, which is what it takes to penetrate your thick skull. We clinked bottles. Touché. It's good to have my brother back. Do you think she really believes the nonsense she's talking? I asked. Who knows? Maybe she just can't face the truth. I shrugged. Well, in her case, the truth certainly wasn't pretty. Sean smirked. She disappointed me. I kept expecting her to offer to turn a blind eye to the fact that you were doing it in retaliation. I laughed. And not just any laugh. It was a deep animal laugh, like I'd heard the funniest joke in the world. It would have to be a year-long orgy to even come close to what she and that piece of shit Ratzak were doing. Next chapter. Thursday night, I sat on the back patio enjoying the sunset, freshly showered, beer in hand, laptop in my lap, and talked to Haley on the phone. I briefly told her about Claire's visit, not wanting to escalate the situation. While we talked, I opened my email and read through Haley's latest questions, discussing my answers with her. Knowing my intention to feign indifference, she had phrased them in a way that would allow me to speak philosophically rather than reveal the full depth of my hurt and anger. I just hoped I wouldn't lose my cool and give away my strategy when Oscar started asking questions and making impromptu jokes. We couldn't use all the letters. Some of them, if you remove all the X's from the text, you're only left with a few pronouns and maybe the word "the." If you go on Facebook, you can see them. We started uploading them this morning, releasing one per hour. The same thing is happening on our website. There will be a few more coming out in the next couple hours. They're getting a mile of comments. Most people are horrified. There are jerks who think it's normal, and one or two who joke that they'd like to get the number of whoever the bird is. And don't worry, I made sure we blacked out Claire's name and your name on all the pictures we use so she can't sue you or anything. I'm not on Facebook. Haley chuckled. Why doesn't that surprise me? But you should think about it. If not for your personal profile, then for your business. Give me a second and I'll email you the ones we used. Moments later, the email landed in my inbox. I opened the first three, and it turned out that Claire, Ratzak, and I couldn't be identified by the letters. This was a big deal. I wasn't about to shell out big bucks to that lying bitch for blabbing to some fancy lawyer about me invading her privacy. In letters and interviews, I will be D, Claire will be S, and Ratzak will be R. Not using the Z for Ratzak was some insurance. But any family members or friends of ours who asked for a copy of the letters from my mother or Mel, and they assured me that many did, would know who I was talking about. I was sure word would spread from there. With any luck, Claire and Ratzak would be so embarrassed they'd leave town. I was fine with what I'd done. I didn't want revenge. In a way, the means found me on their own. I simply intended to give people honest and direct answers to questions, not whitewash their actions. In my opinion, if they don't think they've done anything wrong, they have nothing to be ashamed of. If they don't want to serve time, they shouldn't commit a crime. I wished I hadn't let Haley go, but I knew she needed to go to bed early and I needed to work out. I boiled some pasta and checked the remaining love letters the radio station used in case someone mentioned them in an interview. Then I set to work on my answers to Haley's questions, tweaking them as I went along. By the last run-through, my performance was fierce, implacable, monumental. It was a performance in words. Next chapter. Danny, this is Oscar. Oscar, Danny. My greeting was understated. Oscar's not at all. I was pretty sure this guy had ADHD. Even as he sat there, he seemed to be in constant motion. It was obvious that he and Haley have just as great a rapport in real life as they do on air. They joked as easily as Sean and I did. I wondered if they were a couple off the air too. Their assistant Zoe fussed around me, placing coffee and apple Danish pie in front of me and briefly explaining how to use the microphone and headset. Her actions were crushingly real. I was about to talk about very personal things to an invisible audience that could number in the hundreds of thousands. A wave of nausea came over me. My stomach muscles tensed, trying to hold back the nest of angry hornets that had suddenly settled in my gut. I couldn't tell if it was through my navel or my throat that those pesky things were seeking freedom. All I knew was that I wanted them to quiet down before I embarrassed myself. A commercial was running. As soon as it ended, I turned it on. I looked at Haley in a panic. "It's going to be okay, Danny," she whispered. "Everyone's nervous. As soon as we ask the first question, the nerves will disappear." I nodded, not believing I wouldn't squeak like a mouse if I tried to talk. Haley took over the introductory and initial part of the interview, and she was right. Though by the third question, I'd forgotten I was being listened to by thousands of people. She was leading me down the path we'd chosen, and I was glad I was able to use the gangrene analogies and project plans without sounding like a complete idiot. "So, D," Oscar said, "forgiveness was never on the agenda? You don't love S enough to forgive her for her weakness?" Instead of answering that question directly, Oscar, I'd like to turn it around. Why couldn't she love me enough to remain faithful? Or at least love me enough to be honest? Good point, but I want to ask, how did she get away with it for 12 years? Did you walk around with your eyes closed? Oscar, I guess in a way, yes. A friend of mine who studied psychology as part of his degree explained it to me. I glanced at Haley, who was frowning. I think it's called confirmation bias, though I shouldn't quote it to you. Jesus, what is it? Oscar laughed. It sounds ominous. It doesn't mean you're a sociopath, does it? Should I call security or use my ninja techniques? Haley snorted. Ninja techniques? Yeah, I'm an origami master. I can fold my enemy into a pretzel. I couldn't keep from laughing. Ah, then I'd better behave myself. I'm not good at pretzels. In all seriousness, I'm a salesman and I'm used to reading plans, not personalities. I'm not a psychologist, so cross your fingers for me that I don't get my explanations wrong. Anyway, the bottom line is that when you believe someone loves you, you interpret their words and actions in a way that supports that belief. I looked at Haley for confirmation. She gave me a thumbs up. So you're saying that for 12 years you believed she loved you and thought only good things about her? And it blindsided you when you noticed signs of her cheating? Yes, that's roughly what happened. I grinned. Now that I've been offered that explanation, I'll stick to it. That way I won't feel like such a gullible fool. Friends, we have a switchboard full of calls wanting to speak to D, so please be patient and we'll get back to you. Hello, S. What do you want to ask D? Can't you find it in your heart to forgive R? The woman's voice was squeaky, which could pass for nervousness to those who didn't know her. But I knew her. The caller was my Aunt Sally. After all, he is your cousin. Too bad R couldn't remember that every time he arranged a meeting with my wife or wrote her a love letter. Too bad he chose to forget our kinship every time he lied to my face and stabbed me in the back. So no, forgiveness is not an option. I'm afraid he's out of my life forever. The woman sobbed, and my heart broke for my aunt, but I couldn't lie to her. I caught a glance from Oscar and Haley, who realized that S must be related. Oscar answered the rest of the call, taking the S off the line with practiced ease. Haley murmured to me, "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my heart clenched. I hoped there wouldn't be too many calls like this. The next call made me blush to the tips of my toes. Honey, you have a delightful voice. If you ever get tired of building things, you should consider a career as a radio host. And if you need any comfort, give me a call. Oscar laughed. Well, thanks, B. We'll be sure to get your D credentials on the air. I'm sure you'll do a lot of good for D's battered ego. I thought Oscar was joking, but within 2 minutes, Zoe was grinning from ear to ear as she placed the note in front of me. Sure enough, Bev or B had left me her number. The calls kept coming in. Most of them were sympathetic and wished me well. One I suspected was a friend of Claire's, as she asked if I could somehow forgive the mistake with the C. A mistake. I'm not sure I can call it a mistake, G. To me, a mistake is coming home with lemon essence when your wife sent you to buy lemon juice, or turning left when you should have turned right. Maybe washing colored with white and dyeing all her delicate things lilac. Can something that happened repeatedly over 12 years and required planning, choices, lies, hiding evidence be considered a mistake? The phone line cut off. I shifted my gaze from Haley to Oscar. Oops, looks like we lost G. Many of the calls offered advice on how to cope with the loss, from meditation to sand therapy to going into the wilderness for a while. One even suggested using puppets representing key players to deal with my irritation. Oscar, of course, couldn't resist making a Muppet joke, likening Ratsack to the Cookie Monster. I wanted to protest. I always liked Cookie Monster as a kid. According to Haley and Oscar, the segment was a success. Zoe laughed, agreeing. Only Justin Bieber and Hugh Jackman got more phone numbers. Dude, looks like you'll get enough consolation to make ends meet. Next chapter. Unsurprisingly, the interview didn't go in vain. At 5:30, my soon-to-be ex-wife, flaming with anger, knocked on my door. Daniel McCormack, open the door this minute. I looked up and saw my father, the designated babysitter for the evening. The show's starting. Just don't give her what she wants, Danny. And she wants a reaction, so don't give it to her. Deny her. Let your words be cold, calm, and collected. I nodded. That's it. I walked down the hall and opened the door. I even managed to smile. Good evening, Claire. How could you? How could you share my letters on the radio? You're the reason they're all over Facebook. She pounced on me with 2 red blotches on her cheeks. If looks could kill, I'd be reduced to ash. They were mine. They were private. You had no right to show them to anyone. I smiled. At last we were seeing the real Claire. Private? Really? Whether you're talking about the apartment or this house, the fact is that you kept them in books on the bookcase that I or any guest in our house could take from the shelf and leaf through. This certainly supports my argument that you did not expect them to be confidential. In fact, without making any special effort to conceal them, it could be argued that you wanted them to be found and shared. So you shouldn't have shared them anyway, without asking me. I shrugged. I was just following the precedent you set when it came to making decisions about our marriage. Besides, I've seen a lot of love letters online. They evoke warmth and emotion in most people. You're clearly not ashamed of yours after all. You've kept many of them for years, so what's the problem? Don't pick on me, Danny. I sound like a whore. I shrugged and smiled, raising an eyebrow. What I did may have been wrong, but it wasn't hate. What you did was cruel. Maybe it was wrong. With a question mark? It wasn't hate? Asking another guy to be the father of our child wasn't hate and cruelty? What planet did she live on? I almost spit out my thoughts, but as soon as I opened my mouth, my father whispered in my ear. Stay calm, cool, and collected. Don't give her a single chance to react. Whatever you say, Claire. Her lack of emotion clearly angered her. Her face flushed even more red than it had when I opened the door. I'm going to make you pay for this, Danny. I'm going to see a lawyer first thing Monday, and I'm going to take this house from you. I'm going to throw you out on the street. Stop pretending. I'm going to make you pay through the nose for humiliating me. How about we save time and move out this weekend? You can move out, take over the mortgage payment, and the laborers needed to complete the repairs. The court will make you pay half. You might even have to pay spousal maintenance. Not likely, Claire. You watch too much American television. It's not like that here. You make a good salary and can support yourself, so you're not in danger of spousal maintenance. As for the mortgage, my parents have offered to help me, but I won't need it if I move in with them or Sean temporarily. Why should they help you? You're employable. You can work and you make good money. There's nothing wrong with you. Oh, but there is, Claire. I'm afraid the stress and worry over your betrayal has messed up my thinking, and I made a mistake at work today and hurt my back. Not true, but I had an old sports injury that made itself felt from time to time, and I had to wear a belt to support my lower back. That's bullshit, Claire hissed. I shrugged. Whatever you say, Claire. I watched as she tried to think of what to threaten me with next. What method of attack would she resort to get her way? Suddenly, I got tired of her and her games and decided to take action. Sure, Claire, we could always just jump to the finish line, split the spoils, and sell the house as is. But if we do that, none of us will be left with nothing. I shrugged again. I could see that this annoyed her, so I mentally marked that I would do this as often as possible in all future dealings with her. So what? It's just money. I've worked too hard to let it go to waste, she hissed. I swallowed the contemptuous chuckle that had built up in my throat. Had she worked too hard? She'd planted a few herbs and rose bushes. What about all my nights and weekends? Then buy me out and you can finish the renovations yourself. Claire narrowed her eyes and looked at me. What did she think I was going to do? Wither like a flower under the warmth of her gaze. I raised an eyebrow as if to encourage her to answer. Instead, she turned abruptly and walked down the path, looking back over her shoulder. This isn't over yet, Danny. I'm going to see a lawyer and make you pay. I closed the door and walked back to the patio where I knew I would find my father. Have you heard any of this? I asked, sitting down and taking the soda he offered me. Yeah, almost all of it. I sighed. I wasn't as cool, calm, and collected as I should have been. I think there was a moment or two when I let her see how angry I was. Nobody's perfect, Danny. And she had her own agenda, and she was pretty cranky herself, so most of what you said probably went over her head. I hope so. Do you have a lot of savings? About 60,000. Why? Well, you remember that loan your mom and I gave you when you were 21 to start your business? Yeah. I started to smile, immediately realizing what my father was getting at. So, son, your mom and I are taking out a loan. We're retired and everything, and we need the dollars for the fall years. I grinned from ear to ear. I'll write a bank check in your favor first thing Monday. Thanks, son. The loan was my idea. Mom and Dad always insisted it was a gift and said they wanted to help while they were alive. They did the same for Sean when he became independent. Both Sean and I were proud and stubborn bastards and insisted on taking out a loan, even though we knew Mom and Dad would never accept repayment from us. I was never more grateful for my stubbornness than I was at that moment, because paying off the loan would only leave me with 10 grand in my savings account. And that was exactly my savings account. Claire hadn't put a dime in it, and no court in the country could say I couldn't pay my debt out of it. Dad sipped his soda, musing about my garden. I guess we'll take on Sean's debt too. I nodded. My father was an excellent chess player, and my and Sean's victories over him were rare. I could see his strategic mind working. After all, if he demanded Sean's debt back, it couldn't be said that they were only asking me to pay it back so Claire wouldn't get to the money. Yeah, Dad pondered. Mom and I are looking at a few investments. I guess we'll have the funds to invest now. Next chapter. The next few weeks, as you might expect, went like a roller coaster, with ups and downs. Claire kept her threat and contacted a lawyer, and I received a letter giving me 7 days to declare my assets. After discussing it with my family, I decided not to hire my own shark, at least not yet. Once Claire sees the state our assets are in, chances are she'll quietly settle and disappear from my life. I've arranged for 3 different real estate agents to provide an estimate of value in writing. I smiled politely when they all said that I would have to pay a lot more for this apartment. As I suspected, all of their estimates were slightly higher than the cost of the mortgage. After returning the information along with copies of the bank statements to Claire's lawyer, I informed them that they had 7 days to provide me with a declaration of Claire's assets. That would piss her off. On the other hand, the love letters have gotten a lot of publicity. Claire and Ratzak got their 15 minutes of fame. The radio station, through Haley, handed me a bag filled to the brim with letters they had received and printed out for me, as well as a few actual letters. Oscar wasn't wrong. Many women offered to comfort me. Haley thought that was great. I didn't. I liked my anonymity. Mom and Mel were with Haley, but for a different reason. I think they were already looking for a replacement for Claire. Dad, Sean, and I finally devised a plan for revenge. It wasn't what I wanted. Being old-fashioned, I would have preferred to just face the asshole, challenge him to a duel, and let the strongest man win. Hell, I even fantasized about living a few hundred years earlier and being able to challenge him to a duel. It frustrated me that we live in a time where the laws seem to protect the guilty over the innocent. The way things were going, if I kicked Ratzak's ass, that snot-nosed bastard could charge me with assault, and I could face time in prison. And sitting behind bars protecting my own ass, literally, doesn't sound like much of a success. Neither is beating him up anonymously or paying someone else to do it. When I told Dad and Sean about it, they laughed so hard they had to hold their sides, so I guess that was a start. The worst part was when Aunt Sally came over and begged us not to turn our backs on Zach. She cried, telling us that he was being shunned by everyone and everything. She blamed Claire, saying she had bewitched him. My mom cried too, but remained adamant. Sally, I understand that you need to support your son, but please don't talk to me like I'm stupid. Bewitched? This wasn't 1 or 2 isolated incidents, but years and years of lies and deceit. He deserves banishment for the depth of his betrayal towards Danny. Did you read the letters? Did you read how much he enjoyed humiliating Danny? Did you read what he did? He was having fun with her on her wedding day to Danny, for God's sake. How can you ask us to forgive something like that? Please, Ellie, for my sake. Please, I can't leave him. He's my son, and he's so sorry for everything. I know what he did was wrong, but he's my son. I know, Sally, but I can't. We can't. Danny is my son. And if you stay on Zach's side, I'm afraid you won't be welcome in my home anymore. My heart shook as Aunt Sally picked up her bag and slung it over her forearm, so it rested on her elbow. She reached for my mom and hugged her tightly, the bag swaying and jingling against her thighs. I wished I could video this and send it to Claire and Ratzak to show them the price of their selfishness. Maybe then they would realize that none of us live in isolation. Our actions affect others. Like a pebble thrown into a pond, it causes ripples. But on the other hand, maybe they won't learn anything, and they'll care even less. My mom burrowed into my dad's arms as Mel let go of Aunt Sally. I stood there feeling helpless, and unshed tears covered my eyes at my mother's pain. I opened my mouth to tell her that she didn't have to say goodbye to my sister on my behalf. But before I could utter a word, My father shook his head and waved me away. The sight of my mother in pain strengthened my resolve. I would never forgive Claire or Ratzak for hurting her. Next chapter. Oh my God, it works. It's really working. I whispered so quietly that the sound of the waves gently crashing against the side of Dad's yacht almost drowned me out. I wasn't addressing anyone in particular, though Dad and Sean could hear me, huddled against me and listening to the muffled conversation coming over the landline. Did you think it wouldn't? Sean asked quietly. I nodded. It's also confusing. So much left to chance. What if he hadn't fallen in love with Crystal? All I can say is it's a shame she only got him drunk. I would have liked to see her give him a good dose of the clap, my father muttered. After the pain he and Claire caused your mother, I think I want payback as much as you do. The prostitute, or lady of the night as my father called her, didn't look professional. Crystal looked quite classy. We paid her a lot of money, but it turned out she was worth every penny. Apparently Zach was practically drooling over her. Apparently Claire was never part of his plans. Dad, being Dad, took every precaution. He even made Crystal sign a non-disclosure agreement. I bet it was a first for her. I had no idea if it would hold up in court and if she would use her real name. But if it made Daddy feel better, I wasn't going to argue. When she realized who I was, apparently she'd listened to Haley and Oscar. She'd even enlisted one of her friends to act as her wingman and help her settle the score with Zach at no extra charge. Apparently, even prostitutes don't like liars and cheaters. With the money I gave him, Sean bought 2 cell phones. One belonged to Our Lady of the Night, the other to us. The only number programmed into her phone was ours. Following our instructions, she called so we could eavesdrop on her night with Ratzak. This was the 3rd such call, and I learned many things I didn't realize about my cousin's true feelings for me. He called me a Boy Scout and a Boy Wonder, and shared quite openly with Crystal and Amber what he had done. He showed no remorse whatsoever. He even bragged about being taller than me for a long time. He told his mother so much about how sorry he was. He cursed me for causing his banishment by family and friends. Said I was a spoiled, pretty boy who always had everything handed to him on a platter. It made me scratch my head. I'm a pretty boy? Sean was a little pissed off too. Neither of us suspected that his jealousy and resentment was so deeply rooted in his childhood. I wish I could slip him something to speed things up, Sean moaned. That asshole drinks like a fish. At this rate, it'll take Crystal and Amber until midnight to get him drunk. And here I was hoping we'd go fishing tonight. I hummed. You just want to see him shit his pants. Sean hummed in response. Well, yeah. Like you don't want that. This was your idea, remember? Patience, you two. Good things come to the one who waits, though I look forward to shit too. Dad grinned. And in the dim light of the cruiser's wardroom, he looked angry. That was one of my criteria. I wanted Ratzak to literally drown in shit. Another criteria was that he had to have both of his arms broken. It's a great metaphorical message to keep his hands off things and wives that don't belong to him. The fact that after breaking his arms and wallowing in shit, he wouldn't be able to wipe his own ass for a while was just an added bonus to reinforce an important lesson. But first, Crystal and her friend needed to kick ass and talk him into inviting them home. The house turned out to be a small, old townhouse with steep, narrow steps leading up to the bedroom, and he'd joked more than once that he was lucky he hadn't broken his neck going down them drunkenly. But today, he wasn't so lucky. How about you take Amber and I to your house and have fun there, sweetie? I bumped foreheads with Dad and Sean as we all instinctively leaned closer to the phone, silently urging Ratzak to take the bait. Sure, he whispered. Let's go have some fun. There was a low slurping sound. I looked at Dad and Sean and we all shrugged. We listened for a few more moments to make sure they were really leaving before getting up. Let's get this show on the road, Sean exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. It'll be just like old times for you two, my dad teased. Looks like the apples aren't falling too far from the tree, huh, Dad? Teased Sean. Sean teased, the smirk still spreading across his face. Sean was right. Dad's jokes drove Mom crazy. I smiled at them. I couldn't think of 2 better accomplices for such a stunt. One by one, we climbed out of the boat and into Dad's black SUV, chosen for this escapade precisely because of its color. The night was clear, thankfully with a small moon. Perfect for what we were up to. Luckily for us, Ratzak lived near the harbor, in an old part of town that was experiencing a resurgence in popularity. Many young couples were buying and renovating houses. Ratzak's little terrace was in the far corner of the suburb, beyond which lay the harbor itself. The street had two entrances, and we knew he usually used the one on the city side, so we used the one on the harbor side and parked in the shadow of the building, away from the streetlights. Despite the lack of lighting, we huddled together, waiting for a signal from Crystal or Amber that we were allowed in. It didn't take long, 15 minutes tops. We all donned the balaclavas, gloves, and dark baseball caps we'd bought to prepare. We looked like a parody of ninjas. One by one, pressing against the walls of buildings to use the shadows they cast as cover, we made our way to the Ratzak Terrace. I felt as if I were part of a covert spy operation. My pulse was racing, but at the same time it was hard not to laugh. I imagined what the three of them would look like if this scene was filmed. I decided it was more likely to be Will Ferrell than Matt Damon. Sean pointed two fingers to his eyes, and then to the front door of the Rathsack house and the good old sign for look-see. The girls, as instructed, graciously left his door ajar. We slipped inside and crept silently into the Ratsack's kitchen. We could hear music, muttering, and giggling upstairs where the master bedroom was. He must have thought he was in for one hell of a debaucherous night with two pretty birds, although given the amount he'd had to drink, I wondered how he was going to do it. I pulled the baseball bat out of my pant leg. I leaned it against the wall. Neither of us looked at it. This part of the plan was the hardest part. "I'll go downstairs and get us refills." I couldn't tell if it was Amber or Crystal who spoke, but it was Crystal who appeared at the foot of the stairs. The ever-cautious Dad put his fingers to his lips, signaling her to shut up. Nodding, she headed to the refrigerator and pulled out 3 slides of dirt. Perfect. The Swedish tang of it would cover up the taste of the laxative better than Ratzak's usual poisons of beer or cruiser vodka. The dexterity with which she opened them said she was far from drunk. She tossed the caps back on the countertop and brought one bottle to her lips, taking a big sip. Dad pulled out his contribution to the evening's festivities. A laxative he called industrial strength. It was stronger and faster than anything you could buy over the counter. He'd gone to the doctor complaining of severe constipation and came out with a prescription. Crystal held the slide up to her father, and he sprinkled a few crushed pills into it. Winking at her father, Crystal put her thumb over the opening of the vial and gently twirled the vial back and forth to dissolve the powder. Wiping her finger on a tea towel, she gave us another wink and then headed back up the stairs. We listened to the clinking of glasses and merriment, and it wasn't long before Crystal returned for more. She and her father repeated their ritual. It took another 6 rounds to use up all the laxative. As Crystal climbed the stairs for the last time, Sean covered his mouth with his hand to suppress a laugh. "He'll shit through the eye of a needle," he sighed. "That's if he doesn't explode first," my father whispered, equally amused. "Come on, honey, drink up," we heard Crystal urging. 5 long minutes passed. It was agonizing. Finally, both girls came down the stairs without looking tipsy, much less drunk. If drunkenness were an Olympic sport, this couple would be medalists. "He's out," Amber whispered, though it probably wasn't necessary anymore. "Have fun, boys. It was a pleasure doing business with you." Once they were out the door, we tiptoed up the stairs, with me leading the way. Ratzak was lying face down on the bed, his jeans around his ankles. Perfect. Another excuse as to why he had fallen. Out of caution, I slapped his cheek, then his ass. No reaction. He was out of it. I flipped him over and turned him so I was on his upper torso. Sean grabbed his legs. It was awkward, and I almost fell myself, but we made it down the stairs without incident. Ratzak didn't make a sound. He really wasn't himself. We laid him down at the bottom of the stairs, and I got the bat out. This was the hardest part. I took a few deep breaths, remembering all the things he'd done to Claire. All the things he'd despised me for, all the betrayals. All the times he'd looked me in the eye and lied to me. I pictured my mom crying, saying goodbye to my sister for the last time. I remembered how he forced me to participate in his lies for my own amusement. I thought about how he'd entertained Claire on my wedding day, how excited he'd been about her getting pregnant, and how I'd unknowingly raised his child. And then I brushed it off. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "It's fine that you don't like administering harsh justice, but I don't want you to ever regret it. The punishment is well-deserved." I staggered to my feet and nodded. unable to speak. For a while, we all looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Should we walk away? Wait a little while for the fireworks to start? I think it's time for us to leave, guys. We left as quietly as we had come. We didn't say a word until we got back to the cabin. We all laughed, but it was forced. I hoped even more that my father and brother would never regret helping me get justice. As my father took us out to the open sea, Sean and I cut up our clothes, gloves, balaclavas, and caps and threw them overboard. The bat lived on the boat. My father used it on those occasions when a shark was hooked, and I simply replaced it in the small utility closet. We anchored, cast the line, drank brandy, and talked about everything in the world except what occupied all our thoughts. Next chapter. "Oh my God, you guys won't believe what happened at work today," Mel exclaimed as she threw her purse on the kitchen bench and joined us on the patio. As soon as Declan and Maddie heard Mom, they left Sean and I, leaving us lying on our backs on the lawn where we were wrestling with them. "Mom," I rolled over onto my side. "Well, I guess that shows where we are." Sean chuckled. "Be thankful for small mercies. In an hour, they'll get bored with Mommy and want to tickle Daddy and Uncle Danny some more. Rest and recover while you can." For a moment, my heart clenched. I wondered if I would ever have the opportunity to have my own child bored with me. I jumped to my feet and reached out to Sean. I lifted him into my arms and we shook it off before heading over to Mom and Dad. Mom handed us both each a glass of beer. Moments later, we were joined by Mel, who sat the kids down in front of the TV with a movie on. Nemo should keep them occupied for a while. "So what happened at work?" Mom asked. "You're not going to believe this. The medics brought Zach in with broken wrists. Apparently he got drunk and fell down the stairs, but—" Mel burst into laughter. She tried to calm herself down. "But the interesting thing is," she was at a loss for words again. He's, oh my God." She couldn't contain her laughter again. "He pooped his pants," she moaned, covering her mouth with her hand. "He's got the worst case of diaper rash." Mel was already crying, and so much so that it made her laugh. We all laughed, and I resisted the urge to look at Sean and Daddy, keeping my eyes on Mel. "Diaper rash?" I asked. Mel wiped her face with her fingertips and nodded. "Yes, he's been lying in his own filth for so long that he's developed the worst case of diaper rash. He became the laughingstock of the entire hospital. Karma. What goes around comes around," Mom muttered contentedly. I smiled. The universe had given me a bonus in the form of diaper rash. "He always drank too much," my dad added, smirking. Next chapter. The months that followed proved to be a long and terrible journey. Claire proved true to her word. She took the gloves off and intended to make me pay for making her love letters public. Apparently, it was up to other people to forgive, not her. Of course, her anger was fueled by the fact that the letters refused to die a natural death. Like a bad odor, they kept coming back. It seemed like every other week they showed up on some forum or social networking site. There was even some joker parodying them on YouTube. As far as I was concerned, it went viral. Their persistence kept Claire on her toes, and she was determined to ruin me. And at first, she tried to get half of my loan payments from my parents, but the court ruled that the debt had to be paid off before she got her share of the savings. Her next step was to evict me from the cottage, but the judge saw no reason to change the status quo, especially after I offered to go to mediation to settle our financial differences, saving the court time and money. Mediation was working against Claire. The more I withdrew, the angrier she got. More than once, the mediator had to ask her to calm down. She tried to get a stake in my business but failed because my parents forced me to organize it. Yantung. Another piece of wise advice for which I will forever be indebted to them. After one particularly scathing text message, sent late at night and prompted, I believe, by a new wave of social media hits and comments on numerous emails, I headed off to the next mediation session armed with a list designed to embarrass Claire. I scored points for her lack of savings. She, like me, was supposed to be saving 10% of her income. But according to her bank records, she hadn't put aside a dime since we moved into the house, while I was saving far more than we'd agreed. The mediator, who was actually a woman, was shocked when I listed the number of shoes, 57 pairs, that Claire owned. I let it go for a moment, then added the number of designer handbags she had in her closet at the time of the breakup, 127 pieces, and asked if she wanted to give me access so I could pick out 30 or 40 as part of the division of her assets, since that was all she had to show from her supposed savings. Eventually, the mediator convinced Claire not to try to get half of my 10,000 in savings, saying that in light of my evidence of how I had paid for virtually everything but groceries throughout our marriage, she would recommend that the court not penalize me for my diligence in saving money, and Claire would not do that. By the end of the year, however, I had had enough of these games, and I got Claire to agree to sell the house unfurnished. I didn't need it anymore. I wanted to move on with my life so that nothing around me would remind me of the disguised devil that was my wife. The mediator supported the idea. The condo was sold fairly quickly, and I must confess I took great pleasure in the fact that when it was all completed, I handed Claire a check for a little over $1,000. That equaled about $100 a year for our marriage. I could live with that. With the money side of things sorted out, I filed for divorce. I sent Claire to her job, not so much out of a desire to humiliate her, but because I didn't know where she had spent the last 12 months. It was of my own free will. I needed the distance. The first night, a few days before the application, when I realized I had spent the entire day without once thinking of her, the feeling was indescribable. There are no words in any language known to mankind to convey the sense of elation I felt. I felt the way I imagine a dying person should feel when they are told their disease is in remission. I was actually crying. I rested my forehead against the table and sobbed like a child with gratitude. Wave after wave of tears poured out of me, but I didn't fight them. Not this time. I didn't fight them because they weren't tears for Claire. They weren't tears for the loss of my marriage. They weren't tears of resentment and offense, or even anger and rage. They were relief, pure, unadulterated relief. It was the knowledge that there would be life after Claire, maybe even love after Claire. It was the final cleansing of my heart, a final release of negative emotions. They were washing away everything that connected me to Claire. They weren't harmful, they were healing. They were freeing me from the past, and I let them flow. And when they finally subsided, I laughed. I was free. Sure, there were still some details to sort out, but emotionally, in every way that mattered, I was free. It was a powerful feeling, a life-changing feeling. That night was a beginning, a real new beginning when I was finally able to sleep through the night. I was finally able to enjoy my food and really taste the flavor of the food that was passing through my lips. And best of all, I finally felt peace. It was so healing, so therapeutic, that I tried my best to cherish the feeling. I didn't want to dwell on Claire and our sham marriage again. And at some point, I realized that I no longer felt compelled to tear Claire to shreds with my words. I got what I wanted. Indifference, complete and utter indifference. All this time, my family had been supportive, putting up with my mood swings, my rants about Claire's latest antics, my bad days when I despaired that this nightmare would never end. I don't know how I would have made it through without their love, patience, and support. Ratty left town without ever suspecting that I was the one who broke his veins and set his ass on fire. It just goes to show you can't drink yourself into oblivion. I heard he moved to Sydney. In a weird way, I felt sorry for him. Our family was big but friendly. There were lots of birthdays, anniversaries, engagements, and weddings, and he was no longer on the guest list at any of them. And he had to be tormented with guilt that his mother wasn't invited either. I hoped it was weighing on him. One of the bright spots this year was Haley. We became friends. One night she asked me why I no longer felt the need to talk to Claire about what she had done. As I put my feelings into words, I realized it was pointless. Claire wouldn't hear me. She wasn't capable of it. At best, it would be an accusatory spat that would lead nowhere. At worst, it would help her justify herself to herself. And while she no longer had the power to hurt me, I wasn't about to help her ease her conscience at my expense and listen to her try to whitewash her actions with a bunch of lies and self-deception. It was during another evening with Haley that I had an epiphany. While I was a romantic who married for love, Claire was an actress and married to her second star, her leading man who was supposed to showcase her beauty and skill. Our time with Haley was platonic. I liked her madly, and her light touches and warm glances told me she liked me too. But I didn't want to start a relationship on the side and hurt her, and myself for that matter. When and if I made my move, I needed to make sure I was acting, not reacting. I wanted the decision to be made in good faith, not out of need. I was honest with her. She deserved my honesty. I told her I was in a tunnel, and out of admiration and respect for her, I didn't want to escalate our friendship until I was through the darkness. I'll never forget her smile when she asked me, "Are you saying I'm your light at the end of the tunnel?" Next chapter. I stood at the mailbox of my new home and looked at the formal envelope in my hand. I knew what it contained without even opening it. It was my decree of the absolute. Without looking back, I walked to my truck and climbed in. At every stoplight, at every stop, I looked at the envelope lying on the passenger seat. It was over. It was finally over. And that's when I stopped looking at it and focused on the road ahead, the road to my future. Who knew how things would work out with Haley? Not me, not her. But I had a good feeling about her. A feeling I was willing to take a chance on. A feeling I was willing to explore. I sped up, impatient now. I needed the light at the end of the tunnel, and I was going for it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.